anytime you do something, you naturally develop an eye for it, right? And so when I am listening to teaching and preaching, I am listening to not just the content, but even the technique, because you're functioning in a world that I live into, right? And I think what I was trying to get at with the threads is really this idea that there seems to be an inordinate preoccupation with preachers being clever. So much so that they are more imaginative and creative than they are doctrinal. And so there's a lack of education and teaching, and primarily teaching about Jesus, that is filling up the pulpits and even the sermon clips that we see on Instagram. And I see this as a problem. One, because even Paul says, like, I made sure not to know nothing among y'all but Jesus and him crucified, lest my wisdom take away from his power, right?
Yeah.
And so I see the opposite of that, where it's like, no, I want my wisdom and I want my intellect and I want my creativity and I want my rhetorical skills to be the thing that is first and foremost. But what that does is it hinders Christ from being seen, where people are joining the church, going to the altar call, responding not because of the power of the gospel and the cross as illuminated and energized by the power of the Spirit, but because you were good at what you said.
Yeah.
That is a problem to me.
Yeah, let me just say something regarding that. I think that's good. One, I want to just say a lot of the pastors that I've seen kind of do this, or teachers that I've seen do this, I want to just want to affirm them because a lot of them are just very smart, brilliant people. And I think a lot of times are the natural intelligence and the brilliance that God has given us can be a hindrance when we allow that to be the forefront before the word, right? And before we really dig into a text to try to see, no, what does God want to communicate here? Because I think a lot of times when we read something, because we can be imaginative or because we can be very creative or because we...
Which is fine. A parable is creative.
Yeah, right. Let me just say this. I think a lot of times we can look at a text and we can say, man, how can I, make this more relatable to the people, right? And I think sometimes even getting a particular response is the motivating factor than allowing like God to be clear here. And I'm not saying everybody is doing this. I'm just saying that can be a temptation, especially when you're getting a lot of praises and shouts and amens on a sermon. But I do think people underestimate how much they can still do that if they take a little more time just studying God's word and studying the text. You can still do all of those things, and it would actually make the sermon even more powerful. Right? If you would just take time to say, man, like what is God trying to communicate here? Because I think a lot of times, a pastor gets off the stage, they read a sermon, but at the end they just said a whole bunch of quotables and they didn't actually communicate what God was trying to communicate to us. And I think I have a couple of issues with how that's done. So what you about to say?